Hey fellas, it's Dom here, and today I've got another one of those videos where I'm going to look over some very commonly used cards in Legends, and today we'll be looking at rare cards for each of the attributes. So without further ado, we'll get straight into Strength, just to not waste any of your times. And the three most common rare cards I'd say that get used are Orc Clan Captain, Blood Crazed Daedroth, and Aeola's Huntmate. Now with these cards I'm trying to generalise so it can fit into any deck, but sometimes I will obviously have to lean into archetypes and specific kind of decks. But the reason why Orc Clan Captain is such a good card is because it does a power buff to other units in your lane and works as excellent support, which is always universal, especially in Strength when you're wanting aggressive and strong plays. And if you look at the other two cards we have here, Blood Crazed Daedroth and Aeola's Huntmate both rely on kind of giving you draw power through something else, which, you know, strength units might cause. So, for instance, a wounded unit is quite likely in strength, because either you will try and trade something and, you know, you'll damage your own unit or damage your opponent's unit, allowing you to summon Daedroth and then draw a card from it, or because it's strength and they have a lot of aggro, they'll be trying to smash runes. So once that rune is destroyed, Aeola's Huntmate goes into beast form and draws a card. It also does help that they have very good stats for, you know, what they are originally, and then on top of a good ability, it makes them an excellent card, and as they're universal, they fit really well into any deck. Right, and now we'll move on to Intelligence, where I have chosen to go for Shrieking Harpy, Ward Crafter, and Elusive Schemer. Now, Shrieking Harpy is a very nice card for multiple reasons. Not only is it Prophecy, so it means that it can come off runes, but it also has a very strong summon ability of shackling an enemy creature, pretty much delaying your opponent's moves, unless it can kind of get around the shackle, which, to be honest, it's somewhat difficult to, if you don't have the right cards for it in your deck originally. Furthermore, the stat line isn't too bad. I mean, you might notice one thing very in common with all these cards is that they've got 1 health, but I guess that's with Intelligence. You need to realize that the units here aren't the bulkiest, like the actual kind of soldiers, because they aren't what the main kind of decks are usually about. So the fact that you've got a very good ability with shackling is what makes it so popular. And moving on to Ward Crafter, the reason why giving one of your creatures ward is so important is, well, these 3 cards alone can show you why that's so useful. Like, anything can like destroy these units in 1 hit. So with a ward, obviously that makes it a lot harder to destroy them, or it means that you have to put a lot more focus into those units. So something like Ward Crafter, which just, it doesn't have any limits really. You can just choose a unit, give it ward, and then move on. Card's not too bad itself, and it can assist other cards, which is just really great. And then finally, Elusive Schemer, it again falls into the draw power pile. But not only that, when it's destroyed, it puts a 0 cost version of itself into the deck, which is just incredible value, being able to summon a unit with 3 power for 0 cost and get a draw out of it. Now moving on to Willpower, there were a few here that I was kind of considering, like East March Crusader, but I thought these 3 are probably the best ones to go for, because Penitus Oculatus Agent is a very, very good card, basically being a cheaper and more frequently able to be used, a Nasi with a 3 cost, 2 free unit, which is, you know, good stats for an ability which steals an opponent's creature's keywords. Against the right deck, this can be a very cheeky maneuver. So an example could be if you're up against Invade, for instance, and your opponent has just reached, say, turn 11 or 12, and they've got a high level gate, and they use their entire magicka to summon, say, a Siege Crawler, and it's gained a bunch of keywords because their gate's at such a high level. An agent like this can just click its fingers and steal every single one of those keywords, and if it's got a lot of them, that can include charge and lethal, and if it's got even more, say ward, there's so many here which can just be so useful that it's just a really good card. And 5th Legion Trainer kind of falls into the same bucket as Orc Clan Captain does from earlier. It's just a very nice way of buffing all your units as they come out, and making them stronger and kind of supporting them. And Broomer Profiteer is obviously good for keeping your, you know, actual face safe and making sure that you're not going to lose as quickly, and allows you to take a few more hits, allows you to kind of get in the game a bit longer in case you have bad draws or you're unfortunate with what your opponent draws. So a card like Broomer Profiteer is really good and has really good stats for a 2 cost as well. So now moving on to Agility, we have some more expensive units, which include Shearpoint Dragon, Territorial Viper, and Cliff Racer. Moving on to the more kind of animalistic side of cards here. Now, Shearpoint Dragon, you don't always see this one because it's quite expensive, but I still think it's a very good card, which you do see people use quite a bit, especially when they've got a lot of reduction cards in their deck, as the stats aren't the best for a 6 cost, but giving a creature -2/-2 makes up for it alone, and then furthermore on top of that, having the extended ability that, or a passive, whenever you reduce a creature's power or health, it will be reduced by an extra 1, with stuff like Beloved Goblins or anything else like that. It's so useful, and it can just kind of get so much more value from that passive effect, even though its summon ability and its stats are about good enough to be worth using anyway. Now moving on to Territorial Viper, the reason why this card is so good is because it's the equivalent of, say, Piercing Javelin for agility. Yes, it's not Prophecy, and yes, obviously if your opponent's unit's got a ward, or if there's a guard in the way, you can't reach it. However, this card is cheaper, and there are ways, obviously, of keeping a Territorial Viper from dying on its first hit if you, say, give it ward or anything else like that. And then finally, Cliff Racer, the reason why this card is so good is, again, it's a bit like Lightning Bolt for intelligence, but instead, this is more of a unit, so it can be used to destroy other units as well, and means if your opponent's on 4 or less health and they're open, you can draw this and just win the game. Now, over to Endurance, we have a few different kind of cards here. We have Mummify, I'm gonna mess it up. Argonian Venom Tongue, there we go. I don't know, dumb. And Old Velothi Assassin. That's probably wrong as well, but oh well, we'll move on. And the reason why Mummify is such a nice card is because it doesn't really, you know, have much of a limit on it. You can grab your opponent's strongest unit and turn it into a 2/2 Shrivel Mummy. It's a prophecy as well, which means you can get it off runes, and it's free cost anyway, so it's not even that expensive to play, which is really good. And then Venom Tongue, moving over to that, it's got 1/4, which might not seem the best for a 4 cost, but as it has lethal, it very much makes up for this. And whenever it slays, it gains or gives you 1 extra Magicka, which again, really good, very useful. We love to see it. Gaining Magicka is something that Endurance is very much about, as they have some incredibly good high cost units, and they kind of need to rush to get there to outpace your opponent, which is what they do. And that's what makes these cards so great, is that they kind of do what you need best. And Old Velothi Assassin has Rally as well, and Rally is just so useful, especially for, like, if you can get this card off early and draw it in your first hand, you might be able to get it down before your opponent even gets a card down, get a few kind of hits off with Rally, buffing up your cards for later, and if your opponent does summon something and you get this card late game, it's got lethal and can get rid of those cards as well. So it's got 2 different sides to it, which are both very useful. Now finally onto neutrals, I did actually struggle to find a third card, and what I mean by that is Close Call is the one that I was thinking might not make the most sense here, because you don't usually see it unless cards are very much about using summon abilities, or maybe Swindler's Market for instance. But nonetheless, Close Call is a very nice card when you have cards that you can afford to just re-summon again and again and get off a very powerful summon ability. Or even if you have a very strong 10 cost card, if it has a strong summon ability, it can sometimes just be worth to bring it back to your hand, fully reset its stats and then just summon it again, which is just very nice. And then Dismantle, you see a lot of people run Dismantle. To be honest, I quite often am quite risky and don't run it, even though it's so useful, especially for up against a deck with supports, and almost every deck runs at least 1 neutral creature, other than ones which are kind of very much strict to their things. But it's nice to have a card like this, which can have those 2 uses, mainly to destroy supports, as some supports can really snowball if you can't get rid of them. And finally, Silent Pilgrim. It's just so useful for every multi-attribute deck. If there's some really strong cards, like if you desperately need, say, like a General Tullius, the chance of him drawing that is so much higher than any other card, which is just draw a card from your deck. And having something which is a lot more consistent, and does have, I mean, it's a weak body, but it's still something on the board, makes it really good and very viable to use. But that's pretty much it. These are all the kind of frequently used rare cards in the game. If you want to see one for epics and legendaries, let me know in the comments. And other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed. And, well, yeah, if you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.